Kailabreece.
Intelligent design, ID. It's basically promoted as a serious scientific research effort at ascertaining the origins of life and the universe. But it's basically a modern-day teleological argument, one that argues in favor of God's existence based on perceived evidence of order, purpose, design, or direction. The hypothesis looks like this. Complexity implies a designer, the universe is highly complex, and therefore the universe has a designer. There's one huge problem with this logic. It's non sequitur, meaning the conclusion is a fallacy because the conclusion does not follow from the premise. Even if the premise and conclusion are all true, the conclusion is not a necessary consequence of the premise. This reasoning is called affirming the consequent. An example would be, if I have a cold, I have a runny nose. I have a runny nose, and therefore I have a cold. That doesn't work because there's all kinds of reasons why I would still have a runny nose. The ID movement is rooted at the Discovery Institute, a supposed research-based think tank organization, yet it is funded exclusively by wealthy Christian fundamentalists. Moreover, a federal court recently ruled that the Discovery Institute pursues demonstrably religious, cultural, and legal missions, and the Institute's manifesto, titled The Wedge Strategy, describes a religious goal, actually stating, reverse the stifling dominance of the materialist worldview and to replace it with a science consonant with Christian and theistic convictions. That does not sound like science. That's blatant dogma. ID is pseudoscience, which is a self-proclaimed science that does not adhere to the scientific method and lacks supporting evidence or plausibility. The scientific method is based on gathering observable, empirical, measurable evidence, subject to specific principles of reasoning. Let's not forget that this is the exact method that got us to where we are today. There are ways to identify these pseudosciences. They have a use of vague, exaggerated, or untestable claims. There's an over-reliance on confirmation rather than refutation. They lack openness to testing by other experts. They lack progress, personalization of issues, and they use a lot of misleading language. Still, what is disheartening is that this movement is pinching the minds of apathetic people. And what's ridiculous is that this same institute that downplays science's ability to find answers appears to quote science whenever it is convenient and favorable. This movement claims to have legitimate scientists, and many actually all are, although all are Christian fundamentalists. But the reason this issue is not one of science is that science must make predictions. It must collect facts in order to generate a theory. What facts exist? The fact that the world appears amazing and perfect is not proof of supernatural phenomena. A good example of making a prediction is Pluto. It takes Pluto 248 years to orbit the Sun, and yet we've never actually seen it happen. But we have an understanding of physical laws and space, and thus we can make a prediction. ID makes no predictions. It simply tells us that everything is awesome, which we know, and that things can only be awesome if they were willfully created by a designer. With that in mind, where does this leave the designer? How can we rationally defend a law that states every design requires a designer, if the designer itself is an exception? Intelligent design cannot be taught in our science classes because it is not a science. And for those who feel all perspectives need to be shared, well, we might as well invite some astrologists and some psychics, and then we can teach our children nothing. Or we can start teaching evolution in religious courses. The truth is, science and theology are opposites. They're not in opposition, but they're opposites. One is based on the natural and the other the supernatural. If God is supernatural, then he can never be proven or disproven. Science and faith can coexist. Many of the great scientists were extremely spiritual, and it was their pursuit of natural truth that gave us the future, not of their pursuit of a pseudoscience. My question to my fellow intellectuals is this: where do you stand in your opinion of intelligent design? And where do you see it eventually going? I say, let us keep our supernatural beliefs where they belong, outside the natural understanding and personal. Likewise, if humankind can't figure out its own individual purpose, what makes us think we can figure out the purpose of the universe? This is kailabreece. What do you